Welcome everyone to Color Commentary. We are your Pauper commentators, Michael Petchik and Adrian Guarzales. How's it going, Adrian?
Pretty good, Mike. How are you doing today?
Good. I started my new job this week. It's pretty fun.
What?
Yeah, I actually know someone who works there, so it's been pretty enjoyable. I've been getting some good experience and generally having a pretty good time. But let's take care of the upkeep, and then we got some GP related stuff to discuss, and then we've got a little bit of a retro set review going on for the tail end of this. But
Slow time in Pauperland.
yeah, news has been a little bit on the slow side. We do have a quick little topic we wanted to touch on, courtesy of the Twitter, but we'll get to that. So first off in the upkeep, this show is brought to you as it is every single consecutive week in part by Original Magic Art. Original Magic Art is a great web store with all sorts of dice bags, playmats, art prints, tokens, featuring art from throughout the history of the world as a whole and also Magic itself. They collaborate closely with artists to license their artwork, so they get all sorts of really interesting and unique playmats that oftentimes aren't available other places. So if you want to help support the show and also get yourself a little bit of a discount, you can use our affiliate link, which is originalmagicart.store/commentary, spelled as it is in the name of this podcast, or during checkout you can use the affiliate code commentary in all caps, spelled again as it is in the name of this show, and receive 10% off your order. So not only are you helping support the show, you're getting a little bit of a discount on your very sweet new Magic accessories.
Oh boy!
Boy howdy, do I have a deal for you? All right.
Uh-huh!
But yeah, again, either originalmagicart.store/commentary or the affiliate code commentary in all caps, both spelled as it is in the name of this show. Go get them. What do you got for us, Adrian?
Well, we've updated the Patreon. Well, no, we have a Patreon. For just $1 an episode, you too can hear the full show, including the pre and post shows, and you get access to our Patreon-exclusive Discord channel. And, you know, there's actually another benefit we don't ever really talk about, which is that I give you a shout-out at the end of the episode.
Yeah,
so,
we never really worked that one into the little patter at the beginning of the show. But yeah, there's someone who gets shouted out.
A shout-out. Take him out. Like on a date. No. I'm moving on. On Saturday the 25th, we will hopefully have the new episode of Common Area up. More exciting stuff. So, Common Area are extremely successful and world famous stream, excuse me. Yeah, so good times. Mike, what do you got?
All right, so a bit of a recap of recent history. I went to GP Providence, met a fan, and didn't really do that much. I only went down for the one day.
You met a fan. I want you to explain that a little bit more.
I met Elob Mert, who submitted our viewer question from a couple of weeks ago. I met them playing in the Pauper event for the day. I did not do super great. I was on Tortured Existence. I think the deck is still a solid choice, but wound up in the draw bracket after round one due to a minor misplay where I could have cycled a brown scale, but instead chose to Crypt Rats for one more, and that wound up costing me the game.
Oh, dude, you're bad.
Yeah, bit of a bummer. I definitely, it was one of those things where, like, as soon as I saw the line, I was like, oh no, I goofed this one up. But more importantly, I really just went there to get a bunch of stuff signed by artists, as well as pick up some, cheap, well-played cards. Did you know that Blood Moon is under $20 at this point?
Yes, Mike, I did, because I recently completed my playset. No, I'm missing one still. But yeah, I recently bought a pair of Blood Moons for $30.
I was surprised. I was honestly surprised. But yeah, I picked up some EDH stuff, and also just it was a quick little trip on we've got this thing called the commuter rail here, and it was a really enjoyable, nice little like hour-long train ride in this kind of neat rail system. So I had a good time. But yeah, it's always great to meet fans, and yeah, it was a pretty neat little low-key experience. It was a little on the small side. I understand that there was a competing GP over in LA and kind of split a chunk of the more grinder scene, and yeah, I don't know. I had a good time. But you've got some GP stuff coming up. Why don't you tell the folks at home?
That is true. I am going to be playing the main event at GP Richmond. I am hoping to finally day 2 at GP. I don't know if you know this about me. I'm actually incredibly bad at competitive Magic. Sure, I got the show. Sure, I do well at FNMs, but I've never really been able to. I've never day 2'd at GP. So, which is like less than table stakes for doing well at competitive Magic. I feel like all my friends are like, oh yeah, when I wait on day, I can't play in the Pauper event because I'm gonna day 2. So it's like I'm not even on that level yet. So hopefully I day 2. If not, I will be playing in the Pauper event. I'm hoping to be able to hang out with our friend Alex Ullman. We'll see though. He recently announced this on Twitter, so I don't feel bad saying it on the show. But he is actually going to be on the commentary team.
Coverage.
What's the difference?
He's doing text coverage, so he will not be on the actual stream.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry, Al. I know that's still really awesome. I know it's a dream come true for him. So I do want to say big props to Alex on that. You deserve it, man. I don't even know if he listens to this show, but you deserve it, man.
Yeah.
So the other big thing, Mike, is that Richmond has actually been a destination for me for a while now. Do you know why that is?
It's a Guar thing, isn't it?
It is. Richmond is the city that Guar is from, alongside some other big thrash bands I'm very into, like Municipal Waste. Lamb of God's also from there. Not super into them, but the Richmond thrash scene is pretty great. It's one of my favorites. So I am going to be making my pilgrimage to Guar Bar at long last, where I will be eating seitan because I'm a vegetarian and walking away with way too much swag.
That sounds about like what I'd expect, but yeah, if folks happen to be out at GP Richmond, Adrian will be there. Go say hi to him.
Twitter might not be good. Tweet at me. I'll figure it out. I'm not very good at tweeting.
I know, but actually, what format is it?
Legacy.
Oh, it's a Legacy GP.
Yeah, so me, Aaron Rubin, you know him, you love him, and then a couple of other Legacy folks are going to be there. People who've watched our Pat's Games tournament, the winner from that is going with us, Jeremy. He's one of the better players in the Austin area, if not one of the best players in the Austin area. I think he recently, his team won like a team trio event GP, and they got to go to the Pro Tour for the team trio event. I don't know how well they did, but it's going to be great to hang out with those guys. They're all very good Magic players. I'm definitely the worst out of all of them. So, but I'm looking forward to a couple of days of fun and playing Magic with them.
Well, that sounds like an absolute blast. So yeah, cool things going on. All right, so let's crack the lid on kind of an older set that we wanted to talk about. We've done this in the past. We talked about Rise of the Eldrazi, which was kind of a watershed moment, if you will, for Pauper as a format, and we've been wanting to kind of return to that because we thought it was an interesting episode and a nice way to look back on sort of where the format has come from. And today we're talking about another one of the classics, all-time high for Wizards in some people's minds, Innistrad. So, Adrian, were you playing when this set came out?
Casually. This is the set that Liliana of the Veil is from, and I believe me and my friends in college really first started playing around Scars. So this was definitely a set that we had access to. And I remember this is like my only. This story only makes sense if you're casual. I had 2 Vampire Nocturnuses, and my friend said, "Wow, I really want those Vampire Nocturnuses. What in my entire collection could I possibly give you a let go?" And I was like, "Hey, that Foil Liliana of the Veil card seems pretty sweet. I'll take that."
Wow.
And, well, at the time, we thought all mythics were worth the same. One. We thought that 2 mythics were certainly worth 1 foil mythic, and we just really didn't know any better. People, I tell that story now, and people are like, "Wow, you really took advantage of him." We didn't know. We really didn't know. We thought it was an entirely fair trade at the time. I wasn't trying to pull the wool over his eyes or anything. We weren't playing competitively. I had a mono black deck that didn't need Vampire Nocturnus. This is the same guy who insisted I could no longer play with Phyrexian Crusader because it was too overpowered. So, I mean, it was a very different time in Magic for me. And I'm sorry I know that we want to get to the set review, but it's really weird how when you stop playing in that kind of environment, you can never really go back.
Yeah, it is kind of there's that turning point where you
where you get more competitive, and it's very difficult to go back and play with people who still play like that, for me at least, because now I'm competitive and now I really want to win, and it's not just about playing cards that I think are cool. So a little bit of innocence lost in that story, truly a story of Magic innocence, I guess is what I'm getting at, an innocence that I have since lost, and so I like that story.
Yeah, and that nice little aside here. So this was actually right around the era when I came back to Magic when I was in college. So I have like a very strong love of this era for its art in specific, and this is Triple Innistrad is often foisted as one of the best all-time limited sets that Wizards has ever put together, and sets that are good for limited are generally pretty solid for Pauper, because limited is a format that's based heavily in the lower rarities. So this set is, not one of the absolute all-time best for Pauper, but it has some notable standouts. And
I'm already seeing some. So let's crack open these cold boys.
Yeah, let's go for it. I want to start things off with Doom Traveler, which is just a white for a 1/1 that when it dies, you put a 1/1 flying spirit token into play. And this has been a staple of a lot of mono-white aggro decks over the years. And it still probably holds up. Like, if you need just a 1-drop that is going to provide you with some level of versatility, I still like this card.
Yeah, I think it's a fine card. It blocks well, and it turns into a hard-to-answer creature. It slots very nicely into the Soldiers deck that we've covered in the past, the mono-white weenie deck that doesn't really see play anymore but used to. It's definitely a strong card, and I believe it was standard playable.
Yeah, I mean, and this, for example, sees play in a reasonable amount of cubes. It definitely helps support aristocrat-style decks, and while it's no longer, a top performer of the format, it still has, kind of a soft place in my heart. And definitely whenever you think about mono-white aggro, this is a card that has to be discussed, because if you're planning to go wide, this thing is pretty solid. Now, that said, the rest of white in this set was not really anything to write home about in a huge way.
Oh, I got 2 cards I want to talk about if you don't have any more white cards. The first is Ghostly Possession, which sees play in that Glarelock deck. Ghostly Possession is 2 and a white, enchant creature. Enchanted creature is flying, prevent all combat damage, about 2, and dealt by enchanted creature. Just gets an honorable mention from me because it's in kind of a weird brewery type strategy that people have been playing lately. And also my coworker keeps talking about it, so it's on my mind. And then the other white card I really wanted to mention is actually Village Bellringer. Which 2 and a white gets you a 1/4 with flash. When Village Bellringer enters the battlefield, untap all creatures you control. Unfortunately, we don't really have a way to abuse this at common. You would have to be playing like Ghostly Flicker, I guess. But this is a combo with a card like Zealous Conscripts, which got printed, I believe, in Avacyn Restored.
Does it combo with that, or does it combo with Kiki Jiki?
Yeah, it's Kiki Jiki.
There we go.
Dude,
Okay.
I have totally drafted like the same half of that combo before and been like, oh, I'll just win the game. Like, no, I actually need a Kiki Jiki.
I've got to imagine that Village Bellringer, has some sort of application. There's got to be some weird thing. I want to say I remember at some point someone like slotting this into some kind of creature ramp deck as a way to get more out of their creatures.
It's a sweet card with that doesn't like that effect doesn't really exist. Like untap all your creatures on a creature with flash. Like I don't think that really exists elsewhere. So it's a pretty sweet effect. It's just we can't really abuse it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's someone in the comments who will come at us with the weird 4-card combo that this goes infinite with, but I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah.
Now moving on to blue. Let's talk
now
about.
We got some ringers.
Let's talk about first one of the most frustrating win conditions, and then one of the all stars of the format. So first off, I want to talk to you about Curse of the Bloody Tome. So one of the things that the set introduced was the Curse subtype. All of these are cards, enchantment or a curse, and all of them enchant a player and does something negative to that player. And Curse of the Bloody Tome is 2 and a blue for an enchantment or a curse. Enchant player. At the beginning of enchanted player's upkeep, that player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. This thing used to be the most miserable win condition ever, but we've kind of seen blue-black teachings taking a bit of a backseat in recent times.
Yeah, it used to be very frustrating to play against. It's just kind of annoying because you don't really want to concede because it's definitely beatable is the other thing. It's so slow. But every time I also see it, I don't know if you're a big King Diamond fan, but he's got a song called Girl in the Bloody Dress, and I always think of it when I see that card.
Huh. Wonderful little connection. This one also has a very nice promo art. I don't know if you ever seen that one. Yeah, it's nice. But yeah, this is kind of a former player in the format, but given the fact that the format's only been speeding up over the years, this is kind of a little too slow. And following that, immediately, let's talk about Delver of Secrets. It was here during our first episode. It's here now. It's going to be here unless they ever chose to ban the dang thing.
Or if they somehow printed a blue 3/2 flyer that just was you for a 3/2 flyer.
Yeah. So Delver of Secrets is 1 blue mana for a 1/1 human wizard. Beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card. If an instant or sorcery is revealed in this way, transform it. The backside of it is a 3/2 flyer. So,
does anything else need to be said?
Not really, but I do think that it's really interesting that this card showed up in a set that is considered one of the greatest limited environments of all time, and I have never liked this card in limited.
Oh, it's garbage. I think that's true of a lot of constructed cards, though. For example, Crucible of Worlds in M19, very powerful card, really awful in draft or sealed.
I was going to say, is there anything you can actually do with that?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Delver, you could theoretically make a good deck, but if you're running that many instant and sorceries, it's not that good. But this is a card that saw standard play, sees legacy play, sees Pauper play, and I don't think Delver is actually that popular anymore in modern.
Yeah,
if I'm wrong.
I think from what I know, what limited amount I know, it's seen a little bit of a resurgence in that blue-red Wizards deck, but by and large, it's kind of petering out.
What does it say that Modern is too fast for this card, but Legacy is not? It's interesting.
Well, Modern's currently in that weird position of there are 2 decks right now that have weird interactions that people don't understand, and frankly, I'm willing to bet there's a handful of judges that don't fully understand either. So
yeah, well, the thing is that in Modern, if you're going turn 1 Delver and your opponent goes turn 1 Cycle Street Wraith, Faithless Looting, play 2 Hollow Ones, like, you're not winning that game.
Yeah, I mean, it has just kind of been outclassed in some regards in that specific format. But Delver is a mainstay of this format. It defines what creatures are and aren't playable in some regards when it comes to flyers. Like, you'll hear us on this podcast time and time again. Whenever a flyer shows up, we have to talk about it in regards to this particular threat. So, like it, hate it, doesn't matter. This card is here. It's going to be here for the rest of the foreseeable future. Next up, I want to talk about another archetype-defining card in Forbidden Alchemy. So I absolutely adore this card. I will play pretty much any variant on Impulse, and I think this one might be the best Impulse variant.
Also has a great F&M promo.
I am actually not that big a fan of the F&M promo. The F&M promo is a little less forbidden than I feel.
Do you enjoy being wrong?
I mean, we all pick those things in life.
This art is better.
I think it's the better art. I think it doesn't fit the card as well, is my critique of it. But for those unfamiliar, Forbidden Alchemy is 2 and a blue for an instant. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. 1 goes to your hand, the rest go to your graveyard, and then it flashes back for 6 and a black. And boy, howdy, do I love this thing. This thing is just really satisfying to resolve. You get to look at a bunch of cards, and over the course of this and flashing it back, you get to see 8 different cards, put 6 of them into your bin, and it's just a really solid card. And interestingly, this didn't really see that much play until Delve was introduced as a mechanic.
Right, because it's insane because when you can set up a Gurmag Angler with it.
Well, yeah, this works as a impulse that also rituals you in that situation. I think that this card is very powerful, and I'm glad that it's finally getting a chance to see a little bit more play. And it does. This is exactly the type of card that I like. It's not completely broken in half, but it's just so efficient. I will say though that flashback cost is always just feels one too high for me.
7 is quite a lot.
Yeah, the fact that it's instant speed is nice because it means that you can leave up counter spells during your opponent's turn, and then if they don't play anything and you can either cast this or flash it back, you just get to stock up with more answers. I think is really at the core of decks like the blue-black alchemy deck. It just represents a form of card advantage that is very difficult to deal with.
So I got a couple cards I want to talk about too in blue before
Yeah.
we move on. Sorry, it sounded like you were wrapping up.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
The first is Spectral Flight. 1 in a blue. Enchanted creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has flying. Not played in our format. Sweet card though. Got played in standard. Stitch Drake. Blue and a 1 for a 3/4. Flyer, as an additional cost to cast Stitch Drake, exile a creature card from your graveyard. I don't know if you remember Alex's mono blue deck that had like Ingenious Scob. It also ran this card as basically the 5th Spire Golem, which is just kind of interesting. It's a decent card. It's just that the clause of exile on the creature is a little too steep in our format. I feel like it's just so situational. And then the last card I wanted to mention was Stitcher's Apprentice. Not because it's good. 1 in a blue for a 1/2. 1 in a blue tap, but a 2/2 homunculus.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, homunculus creature token onto the battlefield. Then sacrifice a creature. I used to play this with that demon with Morbid. Whenever creature died, you could destroy a creature. And I thought that deck was just like the best deck ever. I was like, I'm going to make a guy. It's going to die immediately, and then I'm going to kill something.
For what it's worth, I do really like Stitch Drake. That clause is a little tricky to hit the exiling something out of your bin, but I have seen this occasionally show up in Delver lists. I'm not a huge fan of it. I do think that if you haven't already maxed out your Spire Golems, you should do that before playing this, but a 3/4 in the air is a little tricky for decks to deal with.
Yeah, it's huge. It blocks pretty much everything that flies.
Yeah, there's not much getting past it.
So yeah, it's a strong card. It's just that exiling the creature card from your graveyard it's a little too costly.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about a card that we actually recently talked about just last week. Bump in the Night. It's a black for a sorcery. Target opponent loses 3 life, and it flashes back for 5 and a red.
And may I just say, people really liked that episode. I don't know if it was the brew. I don't know if it's because Jeff put out possibly Pauper playable with that deck, but people really dug that deck.
Yeah, I think that there is this fascination with the fact that black over the years has been amassing a density of burn spells functionally, and I think Bump in the Night was kind of one of the first major entries we had into this genre of spells, if you will. And I mean, the amount of times you're flashing it back in that deck in particular, probably not super high, but the fact that it's a burn effect at common that even just casting it once, it's on par with a lightning bolt in a burn deck, I think makes it just a fine card. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this crop up again in the 5-0s. Next up, though, Deadweight. Adrian, tell me a little bit about Deadweight.
Deadweight is a card that you only play if you're a huge sadist. Black for a enchantment, aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets -2/-2. So it's extremely good against certain cards in the format, most notably Atog. It just straight up kills Atog for B, which is pretty useful, as damage spells aren't very good against it. I haven't really seen Deadweight get played in a while. It's unfetchable by teachings, and Mono Black doesn't really seem to be playing it any longer. But there was a time where I did not like this card because I knew my Atog was going to die.
Yeah, it definitely has a place for that. And the obvious comparison here is Disfigure, which is this card, except it's an instant, and as a result, it's only until end of turn. So Deadweight fulfills a slightly different role, but I still think that this is a card. I've played it, admittedly, fairly recently, and it didn't feel that bad. I mean, I also did not play it against any blue decks, which at which point it probably feels a little bit worse. Or I guess I also didn't play it against Stompy, where, you know, they do have vines and stuff like that. So I like this card quite a bit. I think that it's still a reasonable thing to run, especially if your metagame happens to have a slightly higher than average quantity of affinity decks. But yeah, this has kind of just always been a nice solid card. And on that note, let's talk about some jank. Let's talk about Ghoul Caller's Chant. This is just a weird card.
So we recently, quote unquote, featured it in the next card that I also am going to want to cover because we covered that zombies deck, and it's extremely good in the zombies deck. It's basically a Raise Dead, which is a terrible spell. B, choose one, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, or, and this is the good part, return 2 zombie cards from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah, and this is a funky little effect. I think we saw there was some riff on this in Ixalan with Pirates, I want to say, that I'm forgetting the name of, but this has some cool interactions. You can use it to rebuy shapeshifter cards, even if they are tribal instants or sorceries. So this pairs well with Nameless Inversion. But the fact that this is kind of a 2-for-1 in a way does really help it out. So I guess the big catch of this is it doesn't see play at anywhere outside of that one particular tribal deck that is pretty far down the list of decks that I'd want to really be a big fan of in terms of them being like a top tier list. And what's this other one that you've got here for zombies?
Right next to it, we've got Ghoul Raiser, 3 mana, 2/2, Grey Ogre, 1B and a B. It's a zombie. When it enters the battlefield, you return a zombie card at random from your graveyard to your hand. So, pretty good when there's like one zombie you want back in there. A little less good later. It's less than Gravedigger. It's a body, and it's pseudo card advantage because it gets you back a card.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely reasonable thing in a deck where everything that's going to be in your bin pretty much is a hit. And
right, exactly.
You're not casting this empty most of the time, so it's usually a pretty decent value in that deck. Now, let's talk about some removal. Let's talk about Victim of Night, which I think is probably one of the most violent card arts in the entirety of Magic. So Victim of Night is an instant for black. Destroy target non-vampire, non-werewolf, non-zombie creature. So pretty bad against the deck we just talked about, but this card is a pretty solid removal spell. I think the thing that really put a dent in this was the printing of Gurmag Angler.
Right. It's a strong spell. Also, the fact that it's BB is not great, but in the decks that are playing this, they don't really care about that, I feel like. And it's also good in the Mono Black Mirror.
Yeah. I mean, it hits a decent chunk of stuff that Doomblade won't, but that deck still does run Grey Merchants and the Zombie Fish, so not at its absolute peak in that matchup. Are there any other of these black creatures that you want to touch on, or black cards as a whole?
Now let's get to red.
Let's talk about red, and let's start things off with a Curse of the Pierced Heart. So again, this is a curse. So enchantment Aura Curse, enchant player, 1 in a red gets you this card, which at the beginning of the enchanted player's upkeep, it deals 1 damage to that player. This is a perennial favorite in Burn.
It's strong because it turns on Needle Drop, and also it's guaranteed 1 damage each turn.
Yeah, and it's also difficult for decks to interact with this pre-board most of the time, so it does kind of let you cheese out a couple of extra points, and sometimes that's all that Burn really needs. Like, if they have a strong hand that happens to include Curse of the Pierced Heart, Curse of the Pierced Heart just kind of ticks down the amount of time that it's going to take for you to actually get to that 20 points that you need so desperately. But yeah, again, a lot of these cards in this set are unexciting but very solid. I feel is the biggest thing about these.
Up next, Harvest Pyre. 1 in a red as additional cost to cast Harvest Pyre. Exile X cards from your graveyard. So basically, Delve deals X damage to target creature. Playable.
Yeah, this is a weird one. I forget where has this seen play, because I've definitely seen
it's
lists with
mostly.
it in it.
I think it's mostly modern. I don't know if we really played it in our format.
I could have sworn that I've seen some sort of like blue-red control list playing this as like a 1 or 2 of. Because the big thing about this is if the game starts to go late, this turns everything in your graveyard into a way to deal with threats that the blue-red deck generally a blue-red control-ish list would generally have issues with. Because if you're relying on red removal, you're great for anything under 3 toughness. Some decks that goes up to 4, but anything past that, you start having some issues in terms of actually removing those creatures once they've resolved. So, I mean, it's not stellar. The fact that it can't go to the face is definitely a downside, but this is probably as close to a red Doomblade as you can get outside of Skred. You think that's fair?
Yeah, I think in the recent meta, Skred is just better, though.
That is fair. I think that Skred gets paired with better cards, and
because the cost to playing Skred is so much lower.
Yeah, outside of monetary cost, there's very, very little that Skred doesn't just simply outclass Harvest Pyre in. All right, so Harvest Pyre included in your weird dirtily red decks. Is there anything else on this list that you really want to talk about? The red stuff is not super exciting.
No, it's really not. Let's move on to green.
All right. So in green, how do you like Knot of the Bone?
Knot of the Bone is incredibly annoying, but it is a good card in my opinion.
Yeah. So Knot of the Bone is 2 and a green for an instant. You gain 2 life for each creature card in your graveyard. All right. So it stops you from dying. It also has flashback for 2 and a green. This is something that shows up in Tortured Existence most of the time. That's the deck that can put it to the best use just by how quickly its graveyard fills up with creatures sometimes. And I've rarely seen this resolve for less than like, I want to say like 8 or 10 life.
It's normally quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the all-time high that I've managed to resolve this for was, I want to say like 28 or something like that. It in a deck that runs as many creatures as Tortured Existence typically does, and that also happens to be playing around with the graveyard and self-milling, this just represents a huge chunk of life, and it's much better than a fog, because a fog is 1 turn. This thing can represent like setting your opponent back 2 or 3 or more turns. So it's really only the one deck. Have you ever seen this anywhere outside of Tortured Existence?
No, because I don't think most other decks can reliably fill their bin like that.
I could maybe see an argument for it in like a green-black Aristocrats list, but outside of those 2 very specific scenarios, I mean, I guess even with the Aristocrats list, that deck plays a lot of token, like things that when they die they leave around a token. So I'm not even sure it's great there, but in the deck that it is good in, this thing is just, grabbing onto the ledge with the tips of your fingers and hanging on for dear life. And it does that pretty admirably.
Yes.
Let's talk about Travel Preparations.
Yeah, I'm looking over the cards. I think that's really the last good one.
Yeah, so Travel Preparations was... There was a cycle of these cards, and we've actually talked about one of them already. There was a cycle of cards where it was their monocolored cards with one of their allied colors as a flashback cost. So Travel Prep is 1 and a green for sorcery. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, and then flash it back for 1 and a white. So this was one of the sort of archetype defining cards for this color pair in this limited format. And it was very, very good there. And this actually saw play in Pauper for a while. Do you know where?
No.
This saw play in Boggles. Because at the time, Storm was still legal. And Storm can bounce all the enchantments off of a Boggle, but it cannot bounce off +1/+1 counters.
Oh, smart.
Yeah, it was a nice, innovative little piece of tech for that specific matchup.
The tech course.
And that said, these days this feels a little anemic. I'm not running this over other counter granting spells, but I did just want to bring it up for, a little bit more of a historic note of things.
Yeah, of course.
All right.
The only artifact I can really think of to look at here is Ghoul Caller's Bell.
No, Ghoul Caller's Bell is not good.
Yeah, it's not good.
I do always like One-Eyed Scarecrow, though. So this is 3 generic mana for a 2/3 with Defender, and creatures with flying your opponent's control get -1/-0.
Oh, that's pretty good against Delver.
Yeah, that's the exact use case for that, and I don't think there's much depth past that. It's the only deck that runs enough flyers. I guess you could, if you were sideboarding this, you could potentially side it in against Boros Monarch. Deck runs a decent amount of flyers.
Yep, it sure do. And the most of them would be 1/2s or 0/1s.
Yeah.
And then they would scred it or bolt it. Or Galvanic Blast it.
That's fair. That is fair. It is also an artifact which leaves it vulnerable to any one of the myriad of artifact removal spells that are ever popular to help combat the menace that is Affinity. All right, so we've talked about this set. Looking back on it, there was less in this set than I actually initially thought. Because when we were talking about doing this episode, I was like, just slam. I was like, we should do an old set review, and immediately I was just like, let's do Innistrad. And it turns out that a lot of stuff that I thought was in the set actually wasn't. So Dark Ascension was the thing that followed this, and I think, and I don't want to get controversial on the podcast, I think Dark Ascension might have done more for this format and given us more playables.
Well, Mike, why don't we go ahead and cover it right now? Do we have time?
I think we do. So
we'll go a little quicker. Oh my God, there's already way better cards.
Yeah, that was the weird thing because Innistrad
Oh my God.
Innistrad is kind of like the hollowed set from this era. And right away, there's 3 white cards in a row here that I have seen played in Pauper. Gather the Townsfolk, Loyal Cathar, and Midnight Guard. So Gather the Townsfolk is a token generator. It's 1 and white. You get 2 1/1s. If you have 5 or less life, you get 5 tokens instead for 2 mana. You get 5 creatures. Good Lord.
That's insane.
Yeah, and Loyal Cathar is a 2/2 with Vigilance that when it dies, you transform it. This was actually, we didn't mention it at the top of the show, but this was the first set with the double-faced cards. So on the back, you get a 2/1 zombie soldier that can't block. And this just is in a similar vein to the stuff like Doom Traveler, where it has, you cast a creature, and when it dies, you get another creature back. And then Midnight Guard. Do you want to tell people about why we care about this card?
Yep, 2 and a white. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, untap Midnight Guard. Combos with a little card called Presence of Gone. Shout out to Nick Marine, bro.
Yeah, so Midnight Guard is part of a 2-card combo, and outside of that, I don't think this sees any play whatsoever. It's just, it doesn't do anything, but when it does something powerful that can end games on the spot. And so with those 3 right there, like, this is a set that was considerably smaller. That's 3 cards already in white where we can point at those and go, I've seen this in a Pauper game, in a reasonably real deck.
Moving into blue, there's also a lot of good blue cards. The first one actually doesn't see a lot of play anymore. Artful Dodge, target creatures unblockable this turn for you. Flashback you. Used to get played in Is It Blitz, if I'm not mistaken.
It sure did.
Before something got printed?
There's been a handful of other things that have been printed. So Artful Dodge's main thing is that it is an unblockability effect.
Well, it has 2 spells.
Yeah, it's an unblockable effect that draws you another unblockable effect. So I think over time these kind of got phased out and people returned to stuff like Shadow Rift. There was a brief period where, there's also the consideration of Distortion Strike, which is, again, 2 unblockability effects in one card. And there was also Slip Through Space that people had considered for a while, which is just the front half of this, but it has Devoid, so you can't get got by a Pyroblast. But that said, this does have a place. Also, what is the thing on Artful Dodge?
I was just thinking that, and with Return to Innistrad, it looked like an Eldrazi.
It doesn't look quite weird enough to be an Eldrazi, but if there's anyone listening to this podcast who happens to be a Vorthos at heart, what the hell is this thing? Seriously.
It's got like a brain and some flippers.
Yeah, I just have no idea what it is. All right, we've talked long enough about this creepy brain monster. It kind of looks like a liquor from Resident Evil.
Or like a liquor from Resident Evil. Sure.
All right, the only other 2 blue cards that I think are really worth talking about here are Stormbound Geist and Thought Scour. And boy howdy, Stormbound Geist, former scourge of Pauper formats past where mono black was the thing.
Yeah, Stormbound Geist, 1 U and a U for a 2/2. Can only block creatures with flying, has flying, and has Undying, which means that when it dies, it will return to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter, provided it did not already have one. Still played in the sideboard of decks like Delver, so that it can fight against sack effects, or more importantly, it's very good in the mirror.
Yeah, this thing is... It's interesting because there were a bunch of things with Undying on them, and this, I think, is one of the standout ones to me. Just the fact that it is in the air, it does play so nicely in the mirror, and it also serves as Edict protection is just spot on. And the fact that, a lot of times your opponent will spend 2 removal spells to kill this if they can, because unanswered, this thing just slowly chips away at your life. And Thought Scour is a blue mana for an instant. Target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard, draw a card. And this is, again, another Delve enabler. And I do think it's interesting looking back on this, how many cards in this set unknowingly would enable stuff way later down the road. So kind of neat to see that looking back here. Anything else about Thought Scour, though?
Nah. Let's move on.
All right. Now, black is pretty anemic in this set, but...
We really only have 2 cards.
Yeah. And the first of which is Tragic Slip, which is a black mana for an instant. Target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Not super great. This set also happened to introduce the Morbid mechanic, and Morbid is if a creature died this turn, do the following. So in this case, the Morbid is if something died this turn, instead target creature gets -13/-13. And I don't think I've ever seen this not kill a thing.
Yeah, it kills a lot of stuff.
And that said, it does require you to be able to activate that Morbid ability, so it's generally going to see play in places that can already run sacrifice effects, or even just stuff that runs a lot of removal anyway, because it lets you kind of double up on your removal. So you can edict your opponent, even if they sack something you don't care about, you now have this removal spell that's active to kill the thing you actually care about. I don't know. I like this. What's the other card that you wanted to talk about in black?
We also got Undying Evil. B for an instant. Target creature gains Undying till end of turn. So both of these cards get played in our favorite pet deck, Pig Trinket.
And Undying Evil even shows up in that somewhat janky Zubera Storm deck. Now, Undying Evil, is there a case for this to be played anywhere else outside of these dedicated grindy decks or combo decks?
I don't think so, because even though you get value off of it in some of these, you get some good stuff off it in those decks. It's also very good with Muldrifter, for example, but it's very high risk.
I mean, yeah, if they counter it and your thing was going to die anyway, you are potentially out 2 cards. So I guess that makes sense. I was thinking of it kind of in the context of being in a similar sphere to unkicked Vines of Vastwood.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I see what you're getting at here. I could maybe see an argument for this in Aristocrats.
Maybe.
Like slap this on a Brindle Shoat.
Getting a little crazy, Mike.
I always get a little crazy on this show. All right. Another one that we recently talked about just last week, Faithless Looting. It's a red for a sorcery. Draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, flashback 2 and a red. It's the red Brainstorm. We've solidified that. It's just good. Play it in your red decks. Got anything else?
In red, we've got...
Not a
no.
whole lot. Yeah.
In green, we have Hunger of the Howlpack. G, instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So already we're not common with Undying. Morbid, put 3 +1/+1 counters on that creature instead of if a creature died this turn. So this is a good card in Stompy.
Yeah, and why don't you explain why this still sees play in that deck?
Yes, because it's an aggro deck, so it needs some extra ways of punching through. You're going to end up killing its creatures, but really it's because you can at will do this with the Eldrazi token that you can sacrifice for mana off of Nest Invader.
Yeah, so it's got an interesting effect there. Like you can kind of get it in mid combat, and worst case scenario, you can kind of make like a slightly wonky attack and throw away something you care about less in order to get Hunger the Howlpack turned on. I mean, this is a permanent giant growth if you want to think about it that way. So it's worth going to some lengths to kind of get this online. Now, there's one other really solid green card which also cares about +1/+1 counters. Young Wolf, it's a green for a 1/1, but it has Undying. Why is this card so good, Adrian?
Because if you kill the 1/1, it comes back as a 2/2, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, so I mean, Stompy's had a long history of its bread and butter being 2/2s for 1 that you can slap stuff onto, and Young Wolf kind of fills out that role. It's nice that this thing sticks around, and the fact that you get to kind of main deck a form of Edict Protection is also really solid. So, Young Wolf, A+, play it in your decks. Also, again, good in Aristocrats, which feels like it's a weird underlying theme of these sets, that just a bunch of Aristocrats cards came out of these. And then, unless you have any other green cards, I think there's just one land that we need to talk about.
Take it away.
All right, that final land, and actually the only one at common here that was not a reprint, Haunted Fengraf. There's a land, it taps for colorless mana, and 3 generic mana, tap, sacrifice Haunted Fengraf, return a creature card at random from your graveyard to your hand. Adrian, do you remember when this was like a mainstay of Tron?
I do indeed, Mike. I do indeed. It still sees play in some Tron lists. Just because its utility to get like a Mull Drifter or a Crusher is still pretty good. But,
Gone are the days where you delve away a chunk of your graveyard to make sure this hits exactly what you need it to.
Yes, correct.
But, you know, it's still just a nice piece of utility, and I could probably make an argument for this showing up in other types of decks, like some sort of anything that's kind of grindy and mid-rangey. I don't hate this in, especially if you don't have access to black or green. But then again, most grindy mid-range decks have one or the other, so I don't know. I like the fact that it's uncounterable as well.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
All right, so we've looked back at these two sets, and now that we've had time to recollect and, you know, think about them a little bit more, where do these sets fall in kind of the Pauper pantheon? Are these, like, vital to our format outside of the obvious Delver?
I would say that the format as a whole would look extremely different if we did not have some of these cards. Some of them, sure. Could we have survived without Loyal Cathar? Yeah, probably. But like Midnight Guard is really key to Rallygon being a deck. Delver is, of course, Delver. Stormbound Geist is really good, just like very solid. Faithless Looting, I actually don't think we would miss as much as other formats. I don't know. The format would definitely look a lot different. I don't know if it would be fundamentally different, but it would look a lot different.
It does feel like a lot of these are kind of slight upgrades on existing cards, and
with the exception of Delver, of course.
Yeah, Delver is clearly the
which
the
would
big,
still exist, I think.
I mean, I think Delver is an interesting case, and I think that everyone at this point has talked about the fact that it was probably a design mistake to put it at common, but I do think it's interesting that's kind of the one standout, where the rest of these cards are by and large just kind of incremental upgrades over things that we used to have, and kind of weird graveyard synergies.
Yeah.
So looking back on these though, it was kind of neat to see, especially the fact that Innistrad wasn't really the one that brought us the most stuff. It was actually Dark Ascension that
I think that there were
density.
more. I think there were more cards in Innistrad, but I think that maybe the ones in Dark Ascension maybe are more impactful.
Yeah, and it's also like a density thing where there's a higher percentage of playables out of Dark Ascension.
The set's smaller.
Yeah. It was a small set that had a pretty reasonable amount of good cards for the format, and it's always fun to kind of look back on these things because there's a tendency over time to kind of homogenize stuff that's already in the format, and not look back on it and see, wow, this set was actually really good for our format. And yeah, that's why we do these little retro set reviews for you. So yeah, if there's anything else, post-mortem. There you go. Especially apropos of the fact that we've been talking about all these weird cards that are probably good in an aristocrat deck. So yeah, if there's anything else that you think that we missed, obviously let us know. We can retouch on this at a later time. But yeah, I think that puts a nice little bow on the top of this Victorian nightmarescape that is Innistrad.
It was a great set, great flavor wise, great in all aspects. But I'll take us out of the show. Thanks for joining us today. This podcast is brought to the support of our patrons, especially someone we talk to quite a lot. I'll talk about you, Stark Maximum. Thank you so much for supporting us. You've been a very staunch supporter of ours. It's great talking to you every day. Consider supporting us just like them if you like the show. Check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. And of course, we'd like to remind you, if you listen to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated as they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or an idea for a topic, you can contact us either via our website or you can email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to my LGS, Pat's Games, and of course Mike's LGS, JP Comics. And then the ever musical L. You can find our theme song Quantitative and other great tracks over on his SoundCloud, which is soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. I also want to take a quick break from the normal script here just to say that I can't believe I forgot this at the beginning. I'm playing in the Pappy Pauper tournament. You can look for Pappy Pauper or hashtag Pappy Tournament on Twitter for more information. Basically me, a couple other content creators, and then folks from the community just playing Pauper matches. I'm currently 2-0. Been playing Is It Delver, one of the bad guys. So yeah, check it out. And then until next week, this is Agent and Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.